Yes, okay. So, welcome once more. Our first speaker tonight is Judith A from Georgia Tech. After that, we will have Anjali Bamzai from the National Science Foundation. So, I wish you a good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Okay. The title of my talk is The Uncertainty Monster and the Climate Science Policy Interface. Uncertainty monster? What am I talking about? Let me give you some genealogy of the uncertainty monster. Monster theory has been around for well over 100 years, where monster is a symbolic expression of cultural unease that pervades a society and shapes its collective behavior. The monster metaphor that I'm using originated with Dutch philosopher Martinje Smits. And she was looking at the coexistence of public fascination and discomfort with new technologies, which she referred to as a monster. The actual uncertainty monster comes from Dutch social scientist Jeroen van der Sloot. And he characterized this as the ways in which the scientific community responds to the monstrous uncertainties associated with environmental problems. So the climate uncertainty monster is a metaphor used in the analysis of the response of the scientific community to uncertainties at the climate science policy interface. The monster is associated with confusion and ambiguity, associated with knowledge versus ignorance, objectivity versus subjectivity, facts versus values, prediction versus speculation, science versus policy. Now, how can we cope with the uncertainty monster? Well, Jeroen van der Sloot gives us some ideas, and my monster coping strategies are adapted from him. The first strategy is uncertainty monster hiding, and I think the hockey stick is a good example here. Now, I don't blame Michael Mann for what ended up in the third assessment report. How can you blame a guy with the ink barely dried on his PhD thesis? He didn't appoint himself to the IPCC. But again, it ended up in there with high levels of confidence. And what was equally interesting, the story of what happened in the third assessment report, how that ended up there, that story has never really been clarified, and it certainly isn't traceable in the third assessment report. But what was equally interesting was how the community responded in defending the hockey stick, and for many, many years. And this is described in the hockey stick illusion book. The second strategy is uncertainty monster exorcism. In the early 90s, scientists were confident that uncertainties can be reduced by further research. Well, this failed to anticipate, the unanticipated complexity of the whole thing. So for every head that climate science chops off the uncertainty monster, here we have a hydra monster, several new monster heads tend to pop up. And there's just no exercising the uncertainty monster. Uncertainty monster simplification. I argue that the IPCC's method of dealing with uncertainty, which is illustrated here, which basically consists of expert judgment in the context of a subjective Bayesian analysis, is simplifying the uncertainty. Uncertainty monster detection is another way of coping with the uncertainty monster. Now here we see that this reflects scientists. We all should be uncertainty monster detective, trying to seek out errors and push the boundaries of our knowledge and clarify the uncertainties. So another kind of uncertainty monster detective is the so-called auditor. Steve McIntyre would be an example here, where he's really checking people's results. On the downside of uncertainty monster detection is when people amplify uncertainty and exaggerate them for political purposes. And finally, we have uncertainty monster assimilation, where the uncertainty is given an explicit seat at the table, and uncertainty becomes an important part of understanding and managing the risk. Well, I think a lot of us in the community have been trying to ignore the monster. And during the period 2006 to 2008, I was definitely in that club. I felt it was, and I made public statements in support of the IPCC, which I think has simplified the uncertainty, and I felt it was the responsible thing to support the IPCC's conclusion. And I would repeat the mantra, don't listen to what one scientist says, listen to the consensus reached by over 1,000 scientists. And then came ClimateGate. Well, I had started hanging out in the climate blogosphere in 2006, so I was really on top of this as this was breaking in the climate blogosphere. And I wasn't so much worried about the reputations of the individual scientists. I was worried about the fate of the IPCC and even climate science itself. And I began speaking out publicly by posting some articles on various blogs. And my main points were the need for public availability of data, greater transparency of methods, the need for greater acknowledgement of the uncertainties, the need to engage skeptics and consider multiple perspectives, and I was emphasizing the importance of scientific integrity. Seems like fairly motherhood statements, right? Okay, and I also began taking on uncertainty in an academic way. Okay, I started doing research, and I recently published 3 papers on the topic. And part of the point that I've been making is the scientific perils of an explicit consensus building process. There's a lot of social science literature on this. Here's some of what I've found. Explicit consensus building processes can enforce overconfidence and belief polarization. Beliefs tend to serve as agents in their own confirmation. Dismissal of skepticism is detrimental to scientific progress. Disagreement provides a basis for focusing research in a certain area. And over-reliance on expert judgment motivates shortcuts in reasoning and hidden biases. Well, there were some people in the community who did not like what I was doing and the explicit and implied criticisms of the IPCC. About a year ago, this article was released in the Scientific American. I had extensive interviews with the reporter and a big photo shoot. And, I thought I was, sort of honored and pleased about this until I saw the title of the article. Climate Heretic, Judith Curry turns on her colleagues. Okay. Now, some people were outraged, calling Judy Curry a heretic. What is this? Okay, but more people were outraged on the other side. Why is anybody paying attention to Judy Curry? She's just a troublemaker. And in fact, there was so much pushback for this article that the journalist who wrote this, Michael Mnemonic, felt compelled to write another article about why he wrote about me in the first place. And he had this statement: simply giving Judith Curry's views a respectful airing, I've already drawn accusations of being irresponsible, and it's valid to raise the question of whether giving her any sort of platform is a bad idea. Further, associated with this article, the Scientific American created an online survey. And the second question in the survey is, Judith Curry is A, a peacemaker, B, a dupe, C, both, D, I've never heard of her. Well, I was personally relieved to see that the majority thought that I was a peacemaker. I even preferred this bunch, people who'd never heard of me. God bless them. So, what's going on here? What is going on here? Well, heresy. Heresy, I replied. I kicked back. I didn't sort of take this line down. Yeah, heresy implies dogma, which implies ideologues. Attributes of ideologues: absence of doubt, intolerance of debate, appeal to authority, a desire to convince others of the ideological truth, a willingness to punish those that don't concur. Does this sound like anybody we know? As an example of this, let me go back to the topic that I raised in my talk yesterday about the IPCC attribution argument. And let's take a look at this. Okay, 97% of actively publishing climate experts agree with this statement. I hope I gave some arguments that would make you doubt this, but included in this survey were broadly defined, which includes economists, ecologists, and a whole host of people that probably haven't investigated the attribution issue in any particular depth. But nevertheless, they're all signing up to agree with the IPCC statement. So why is there disagreement? Not people saying they don't know, or I'm not sure about that, but everybody's sort of signing on to support this statement. We might be cynical and look to Mark Twain to explain this. People's beliefs and convictions are in almost every case gotten at second hand and without examination from authorities who have not themselves examined the questions of an issue, but have taken them at second hand from other non-examiners whose opinions about them are not with the brass hardly. I've looked at this, I've thought about this a lot because I was in the believer court, I supported it during that 2-year period, 2006 to 2008. And here's some hypotheses why various individuals may have such strong belief. One reason might be overconfident interpretation of the scientific evidence. Scientists do that all the time. Groupthink in context of a consensus-building process. Confidence in and authority of the IPCC. High salience of the issue motivates individuals to take a stand. Solidarity among scientists against a perceived war on science. Defense of the status quo, including a strong funding feedback. Personal and political sympathies for environmental movement. And something I'll call the UNFCCC IPCC ideology. And the two that I've highlighted in red were the ones the reasons for my belief during that period. I was confident in the IPCC process, but a key issue was this war on science, okay, that people were attacking science, attacking scientists, and boy, I want to fight against the people who are warring on science. And I think that this really promoted a lot of solidarity, okay, on the issue. I mentioned this IPCC, UNFCCC ideology. Okay, I've characterized it in this way. Anthropogenic climate change is real. Anthropogenic climate change is dangerous. Action is needed to prevent dangerous climate change. Deniers are attacking climate science and scientists. Deniers in fossil fuel industry are delaying UNFCCC CO2 stabilization policies. Now this is the only one that's about science. Okay, the other ones are about values, policy, and politics. But you've got scientists somehow convinced that because if anthropogenic climate change is real, it therefore follows that we must have these stabilization policies, and anybody who is fighting against this is anti-science. So one of the quickest symptoms of identifying who is IPCC ideologue is when they're worried about deniers and how deniers are going to react to something. And I suspect that there aren't any ideologues or IPCC ideologues here. I heard rumors that many of them turned down invitations to a conference because they didn't want to be in the same conference with certain people. Not a good thing for science. And scientists are palpably, the ideologues are palpably frustrated at the problems, with the policy and the science, particularly in the wake of ClimateGate. And climate scientists are increasingly turning to polemics. This is an example from Kevin Trenberth's preprint presented a year ago, last January at the AMS annual meeting. I'll read these. The climate change deniers have very successfully caused major diversions from the much-needed climate debate about what to do about climate change and how to implement it. It is important that climate scientists learn how to counter the distracting strategies of deniers. The media have been complicit in the disinformation campaign of the deniers. The corrupting influence of funding from all sources of vested interests prevents politicians from doing the right thing on behalf of the country and civilization as a whole. Unfortunately, society is not ready to face up to these challenges and the needed changes in the way we create order and govern ourselves. Whoa. Okay, but this is what scientists, many of our leading climate scientists, are talking like this.
What do you mean many? to group that in IPCC, I find it offensive.
Okay, well, sorry.
Yeah, but you're throwing people into a big pot.
No,
You're doing
no, I said many, okay? Many, how many do you, I'm not saying everybody in the IPCC
Let us
is like
honor
that,
our
okay?
rules, please. The speaker has right to speak. And don't interrupt. We will have another speaker, second speaker after Judith. Thank you.
Now, this whole issue of denial, there's a whole literature in the social sciences on denial and denialism. And this particular paper that I reference here, Pride and Dunlap, gave a survey to a bunch of people, and they asked questions about global warming and their political preferences and their socioeconomic status, etc. And the way they defined climate change denier was based on these 5 statements, whether they agreed with them. Global warming will never happen. Global warming is not primarily due to human activities. There is no scientific consensus about global warming. Global warming is generally exaggerated in the news, and they're not worried about global warming. Well, personally, I find it hard to argue that global warming is, often exaggerated in the news. I don't think there's a true scientific consensus about global warming, the details, sensitivity, and things like that. And again, there's questions about whether it is really more than 50% or less than 50%. So right now, if this is what being a denier means, I have to categorize myself as about 50% a denier. So, does this make sense to be calling climate scientists who disagree, or people in the public who disagree with these things deniers? Personally, I don't think this is healthy for science or for the political and policy debate. And calling people who disagree with any of this deniers really reflects a fundamental misunderstanding about skeptics and deniers and the source of skepticism. People think when calling them deniers, they think it's really big industry funded stuff, libertarian think tanks, and conservative evangelical skeptics amplified by talk radio. But the most important group of the skeptics, apart from these academic researchers, is the so-called climate auditors. These are technically educated people wanting greater accountability and transparency in climate research and assessments. And they're enabled by the blogosphere. And Steve McIntyre probably started that movement and is the best-known person. So how have we gotten into this situation where a number, you don't like many, a number of climate scientists are publishing? There are a number of articles that have been published in Nature that talk about deniers. Okay, that there have been opinion essays, there have been an article by Hasselman. So there are people in the journals talking about deniers, and it's getting published in places like Science and Nature. So to say that this isn't an issue, it's only Kevin Trentworth, I think is incorrect. But it has to do with the framework, the decision-making framework that's going on that is sort of put this frame around it. And we'll start with the precautionary principle. And this comes from the Rio conference, where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. And based upon the precautionary principle, the UNFCCC established a goal of stabilization of atmospheric greenhouse gases to prevent dangerous climate change. Okay, now, I'm arguing that we're facing a situation of deep uncertainty. And deep uncertainty is a phrase that has a specific meaning in the decision-making world, and I reference here the book by Grammer and Smithson. In the decision-making world, deep uncertainty is characterized by situations in which one or more of these criteria are met. Phenomena are characterized by high levels of ignorance and are poorly understood scientifically. Modeling and subjective judgments must substitute extensively for estimates based on experience with actual events and outcomes, and/or ethical rules must be formulated to substitute for risk-based decisions. Now, in the presence of deep uncertainty, I mean, is this all we can do as represented by this cartoon? Okay, all those in favor of delegating decision-making, shrug your shoulders. Well, no, there's a number of options, okay, ranging from wait and see to the precautionary principle, etc. But it's been portrayed as these are the only two options, the precautionary principle and the UNFCCC type policy versus a wait and see or delay and gather more info. Okay, but there are other options, in particularly the three red ones, which are getting more traction. Enlarge the knowledge base for decisions. An example of this is, well, if we're talking about energy policy, let's also bring in to this issues related to energy security, as an example. Also adaptive management and building a resilient society. These are other options for decision makers when you're confronted with deep uncertainty. But the point is that understanding uncertainty in areas of ignorance becomes critical information for the decision-making process. The other issue that by focusing on a consensus and trying to get a narrow range for what's going to happen in the 20th century is, well, decision makers, when I talk to them, they say, well, tell us what you don't know. What they're interested is in, we want to know what the black swans or the dragon kings are going to be. Again, in the black swan, you probably know what this is, but in terms of the context is that it's something that you're very surprised by and it's associated with some sort of a catastrophe, but in hindsight, you say, oh, well, we should have been able to predict this. Okay, examples are the 2004-2005 U.S. hurricane landfalls, the Russian heat wave, and the Pakistan flood. Now, the Dragon King is a different beast. This is something where there's a genuine bifurcation, and it's really hard to anticipate it anyway. This would be the tipping point for the abrupt climate change. And these are the things that really have more of potential to really disrupt things. And by trying to get rid of things that are outside on the tails, and not looking at the combination of natural processes and variability and anthropogenic, we're probably missing out on really characterizing these in some sort of a sensible way. So, again, the real surprises and catastrophes, we've been focused on trying to narrow the sensitivities and the scenarios and whatever, but we may end up being surprised one way or the other. This is a two-edged sword. It may be much worse than we think, or it may not be as bad as we think. And the point is that the decision analytic framework influences the interpretation and assessment of climate change uncertainty. And this has been been influencing the precautionary principle about anthropogenic climate change has very much influenced and interpreted the assessment of climate change uncertainty. And the current focus on precautionary principle and consensus seeking is arguably not the best strategy for either the science or the policy making. Now, Jim Coakley may possibly remember this. We were both on the NRC-CRC committee, and we were charged with initiating discussion on uncertainty for the CCSP synthesis and assessment products. And at this time, part of my presentation, I raised the issue, is the assessment process and science for policy, interpreted by climate scientists, working climate science in a direction that is fundamentally less useful for both science and policy? The answer to this question is probably yes, and both the root of the problem and its eventual solution lie in how scientists and decision makers deal with the issue of uncertainty. So the problem as I see it, the drive to reduce scientific uncertainty in support of precautionary and optimal decision-making strategies regarding CO2 mitigation has arguably resulted in unwarranted high confidence in assessments of climate change attribution, sensitivity, and projections, relative neglect of black swans and dragon king possibilities, relative neglect of decadal and longer scale modes of natural climate variability, which results in conflicting certainties in policy and action, gridlock. I think we need to get climate science back on track. I think we need to get rid of the consensus-seeking approach to climate assessments. I think we need to bring considerations of doubt, uncertainty, and ignorance to the forefront of the climate debate. We need to better understand natural climate variability. And we need to recognize that at the science-policy interface, understanding uncertainty and ignorance is of paramount importance. And finally, as scientists, we need to remind ourselves that debate and disagreement are the spice of academic life. About a year ago, I started my own blog, Climate Etc., JudithCurry.com, and on the blog, we discuss a lot of these topics that are uncertain, that are uncomfortable. Yes, we talk about climate science, but we talk about uncertainty, communication, social psychology, philosophy of science, policy and politics, skepticism. Okay, talking about some of the real controversial issues, and I've attracted a very interesting group of people. Sure there's some goofballs, but there's a lot of people with advanced degrees who are very serious people from other fields who are very interested in the climate issue. And I'm hoping to encourage some of you to consider getting engaged in this kind of public outreach, blogging. I mean, this is a cartoon prepared for me on the heresy article by a French cartoonist translating, sorry boss, she won't burn. There's nothing to fear from putting yourself out there, speaking your mind, communicating with the public. We need more points of view out there, engaging with the public. And I hope that you'll at least think about engaging. I'd be delighted to host any of you, the guest posts on the blog. And I look forward to, if you are agreeable to posting, having all of your talks posted on the internet. We'll definitely be discussing the conference on the blog. I hope you'll at least check it out and maybe join in the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. I hope that all of you enjoyed 2 days of conference till now. Also, I hope that you enjoyed Judith Carey's presentation. I have not introduced her because I did not memorize all honors which she received as highly distinguished scientist, as a fellow of the American Geophysical Union, and as a director of either department or school of atmospheric sciences at Georgia Tech University. I probably did not met Judy personally until now, at least I don't remember, but I followed her career, which started basically with research in the Arctic. I don't know, I was at Purdue at that time, probably 20, 30 years ago. Recently, like, just 5, 6 years ago, I was really very angry on her. I was doing work on hurricanes, showing that hurricanes, strength of hurricanes in 2006, etc., was nothing unusual. That hurricanes just follow basically AMO oscillations. And at the same time, jury published or co-authored some article which showed that hurricanes, increases with global warming, etc. So she was basically in the fold of people who strongly supported global warming. I was really mad on her. Of course, I never told her. And then for some reason she changed. A mysterious reason, people say. I suspect it was usage of brain or something similar. Okay, I believe, I don't want to get into discussions because we would, on Julie's presentation, because we would go probably until midnight. So we can postpone it maybe for some other day. And I would like to ask our second speaker, basically, Anjali Banzai, to come and make her presentation.